Now with Bigfoot, there are many cases. So I'm not going to go through all of them, as that would take too long, and just numbering them out would also take too long. There's that many. So I'm going to mention the most notable ones, and like I said, I'm going to mention some details, enough details for you to go and explore them some more. And there's great analytical videos on different cases and footages that I mentioned within this video. Keep in mind that before we get started with the notable cases and evidence, more than 95% of sightings occur in North America and Asia. Of over 800 of these documented sightings, nearly 70% of these were at high altitudes. Here's a story of Native Americans being traumatized from killing a Bigfoot.
I live on a reservation, and the population of Native American to white other is about 50-50. Both whites and Indians have stories that they rarely tell because they are so paranormal in nature. They had become so lax and accepting of the hairy man's presence that one night, while standing on the porch, the father was yanked off by his feet in full view of the entire family. They screamed and huddled together and cried while whatever it was fought with the dad on the porch. The father was gone for days. Whatever it was that had taken him had carried him off into the night after a struggle on the porch. There was blood on the grass, and the family grabbed neighbors and men of the community to help recover the father. They had, however, found the father. He was beaten black and blue over his entire body, ribs broken, arms and legs broken. His eyes were bulging wide. He was trembling constantly. This man had been beaten badly, but something else was wrong with him. He was traumatized. He died that night. To this day, the men who went on the recovery mission to save him have kept their stories to themselves. Only a select circle, including my father, remembers these incidents. Those men found what it was that took my father. They found the hairy man, and they killed it. They shot it to death with high-power rifles and buried the body. The man who did this feels incredibly guilty. Sasquatch is a matter of fact here, and the older generation told us to avoid them and leave them alone, because they are human beings. They are not animals, and they are not magic. They can most certainly be monsters, and this is one story that corroborates that. But the hairy man, Bigfoot, is so human-like that even here, when a group of men killed one, they were so traumatized by the experience that they feel guilty of murder.
They also speak of having dreams of the creature before ever learning about it. Could it be genetic memory? That could be interesting evidence.
Because as a child, I had dreams about the hairy man and his family before I was ever exposed to the concept of Bigfoot. These dreams were frightening and unexplainable, and only made sense years later when my father related this to me.
This tribal member emptied bullets at a Bigfoot and never shot a single one. Is it a case of mind manipulation, telepathy, as we mentioned at the beginning of the video?
And I showed him where it happened, and he said, "So you shot and emptied your shells at this guy, huh?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, you picked up the shells, and there they were. I never pulled a trigger at one time."
Also, as mentioned, sounds are often heard. Those were just a few random cases to start us off. Now we're going into the timeline of the best, what I consider some of the best recorded cases, going back from the oldest one. In 1840, we have Elkanah Walker, a missionary to the Spokane Indians, who wrote that the Indians believe in a race of giants that live on a mountain. They inhabit the snowy peaks and are active at night. They steal salmon from the natives' fishing nets and eat them raw. And I quote here, "They come to the people's lodges at night when the people are asleep and take them and put them under their skins and to their place of abode without even waking them. If the people are awake, they always know when they are coming very near by their strong smell that is most intolerable. It is not uncommon for them to come in the night and give 3 whistles, and then the stones will begin to hit their houses. The Native Americans said their footprints to be 1.5 foot long. And as I mentioned in the history section, this is pretty much the first account that we hear from a missionary that spoke to the Spokane Native Americans and heard of footprints, the strong smell, and the creatures, the large creatures themselves. This is before anybody was really talking about Bigfoot and searching for footprints. I'd say an excellent piece of evidence and a great start to our timeline. 1924, Fred Beck, a miner that was among others, claimed that they shot and possibly killed at least one of these strange creatures because of an attack on their cabin, during which the creatures bombarded the cabin with rocks and tried to break in. Beck identified the creatures as mystical beings from another dimension, explaining that he had experienced psychic premonitions and visions his entire life, of which the ape men were a part. At that point, the area was named Ape Canyon, in the Mount St. Helens region of Washington state. Later in 1984, it was reported that the apes were actually YMCA members tossing rocks into the canyon, not knowing that the miners were below. Now, of course, there's no evidence that this is true. 1924, the same year, a story that in fact came to light much later in 1957, Albert Osman reported to be abducted by 4 Sasquatch and to be kept in a cave for 6 days, where he learned that they had a language and were vegetarian. He also provided this sketch. 1925, a year later, Tombazi, a photographer and member of the Royal Geographical Society, saw a creature at about 15,000 feet, in the middle of so-called nowhere and with tracks. And this is when the first kind of jump in track searches and casting really started on the Yeti in Asia. 1941, Jenny Chapman and her 3 children had to flee their house because of a Sasquatch. Police found large footprints leading through a smashed shed to a 55-gallon tub holding fish that had been pried open. 1950, Toby, at 10 years old, saw Bigfoot and said that it wore tethered clothes. This is one of the first mentionings of a Bigfoot being clothed. 1951, a climber at 20,000 feet found possible Yeti footprints that looked very unlikely to be human. 1964, Mrs. John Uptrup reported being attacked by an over 9-foot tall Sasquatch, whom her later found injured dog saved her from. This made national news as the Dewey Lake Monster. 1967, the most famous Bigfoot footage we have to this day. If you haven't seen this one, listen up. We have what we call the Gimlin-Patterson video. To this day, Robert Gimlin, who helped shoot this video, vows the authentication of the footage of a female Sasquatch and the footprints they collected. It had huge publicity since, and one of the most studied cases behind the JFK assassination. I will be covering this footage a little bit more later in this video under the best evidence section. In 1994, we have some more great video footage of a Sasquatch from Paul Freeman.
Oh, there he goes. Jesus.
From the year 2000, we get the Skookum cast. The furs were too few to prove anything, but some didn't also prove to be of an animal. Some believe the print to be of an elk or deer. 2009, during a rainstorm, I found this one a little bit different and fun. A large handprint was found on a pickup truck window. And finally, in 2015, we have the video footage named Big Red.
Oh, come on, it's right there. I don't have my glasses on. Look at that. Probably like, I don't know, 150 feet. Oh, there it is. Holy crap. Holy shit. Look at that. I can see it. It looks really dark in the, when I'm looking at it. It looks quite red on the camera. I'll see what happens. I don't know if I should do this or not. Not even where is it? Where's that? Oh, look at this. Oh,
I hope the mentioning of those cases inspired you to look deeper into them. Now, let's explore what I find to be the best evidence out there on Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yowie, Yeti.
There's an old Chinese proverb, and it's, what's the smartest animal in the world? And it's the one that hasn't been discovered by man.